Now it is my honor to have two stalwarts to have a fireside discussion of building great startups with a strong sense of customer value. And of course, we'll touch upon AI. Robert Chatwani is President and GM of Growth at Docusign, and Vinod Muthukrishnan is VP and COO at Cisco's Webex Customer Experience. These two have a long list of accomplishments, but I'll share a few, and the rest is best captured by LinkedIn. Now, Vinod began his career navigating ships in the merchant navy before CloudCherry, which redefined the customer success journey. Cisco acquired CloudCherry, and after his golden handcuffs came off, he joined Unifor as Chief Customer Officer. After 3 years, he's back at Cisco. A true captain, Vinod mentors founders and supports startups generously, embodying the paid-forward spirit of Silicon Valley. Robert's career is a masterclass in scaling growth and innovation. After McKinsey, he co-founded a consumer marketplace and held leadership positions at eBay and Atlassian, helping the latter become a global software powerhouse. Now president at Docusign, he drives digital transformation and agreements worldwide, helping businesses around the world become more efficient and agile. Robert's deep customer insights and growth vision make him a standout leader. He also serves on the boards of Jivox, the American India Foundation, and the Bay Area American Heart Association. Now, what unites Vinod and Robert is their shared passion for customer success, leveraging technology and scaling businesses. Now, instead of moderating their session, I stepped back to let their natural chemistry shine as they discuss AI's impact on startups, the essentials of scaling, and blending foundational company building with cutting-edge tech. This fireside was pre-recorded at Vinod's house, complete with a real fire. I hope you enjoy it. Vinod, please take it away. Thank you.
Robert, thank you so much for making time for us.
Hey, Vinod, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, man. I mean, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I think we have very similar experiences. We've done our time with startups, our own startups. We've worked in large companies. But I think at heart, we're builders.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. And the thing is that what it means to build today is changing, right? Especially, I think, from the time that we started our organizations and companies and what that looks like today. So excited to chat about all of that and more with you.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ambush Robert a bit here, and I'm going to hypothetically ask him, what would he be my co-founder? And if he had to build a startup today, put himself in the shoes of how he was many years ago as a founder, and see what it takes. Because in the age of AI, there was a time when the cloud wave happened, and when you said, I'm a cloud product, you were different, or you're mobile first, you were different. Same with AI. And I think, unlike the other two, the AI adoption curve took like 24 hours. So everyone was .ai in 24 hours. So I don't think there's ever been an easier time to build a startup, and there's never been a harder time to differentiate your startup. So with that sort of problem statement out, I'm going to ask you, will you be my co-founder for the next 30 minutes?
Hey, let's do it, man.
All right, that's good. I'm excited.
Be careful what you sign up for.
So long as the docu-signing it, I'm assuming it's okay. So.
All right, there you go.
All right, okay. Fantastic. So I think the problem statement is this, as a lot of investors, a lot of founders will realize. So everyone talks about the opportunity of AI. You can do the things you could not do yesterday. But the point is, somebody who wasn't in your space for the last 10 years can also start doing those things. And I think that is the opportunity and the problem statement in AI. So I want to go back to the basics, to be honest. So let's say we're starting out. What would you think about first? Because I'm generally concerned, everyone's an AI startup. So where do we start? You're the ultimate marketer. You run go-to-market teams at scale. Where would you start with differentiating what you're trying to solve for?
Yeah, look, we were chatting about this recently. I think the speed at which companies can be built today and the cost that it takes to kind of create a company is dramatically different. All the barriers have come down. But in so many ways, the foundational elements, the fundamentals don't change. And the kinds of things that I always come back to are, how are you differentiated? What's the actual customer problem that you're trying to solve? Who are you solving it for? What category are you in, right? Are you creating a category? Are you following a leader in a category? These are some of the very foundational things that I think often I find founders and entrepreneurs overlook in pursuit of what phenomenal technology can do. And oftentimes you see the trap of technology in search of a problem, or technology that quickly gets commoditized because those foundational questions haven't been addressed. And I think the challenge of addressing some of those questions, the difficulty, you should be spending just as much time on those things, especially in the early stages of the company, as you are building out your roadmaps.
Fantastic. So I think if we go out and pitch to investors, we won't start with, I'm an AI startup, that, because nobody cares. Like, AI is foundational to anything you're ever going to build from now till eternity, right? So the fact that your AI doesn't differentiate you, doesn't differentiate us, it's a means to an end, right? It's not a product, it's not a category. It's the underpinning of all technology moving forward. So I really love what you said, because I've invested in companies, and obviously I work with startups all the time. And I've seen exactly this, which is, I'm an AI startup, I'm using AI to, it honestly doesn't matter. So let's go back to the foundation of it, which is, I think we spoke about this over dinner, and I really enjoyed the conversation about needing to have a villain. I think all the great technology, I think we've gone a little soft on that. If you go to the 80s and the 90s and 2000s, I mean, CEOs were very aggressive about who the villain was. And I'd love to talk a little bit about identifying a problem, identifying a villain, identifying what you're truly solving for. Because you said something that I just want everyone to take back, which was the foundations of what it takes to build a company have not changed. Now, more so in the age of AI, it is critically important that you understand why you're building a company, what you're solving for, who you're going up against, or is there a category of threat. So let's talk a little bit about the villain in the story, because every good hero needs a good villain.
Yeah, look, I mentioned the word category before, but what does that mean? I view it as we all have limited cognitive capacity to think about the people, the organizations, the problems and challenges in our lives. So category, in my mind, is just a container that a customer or prospective customer, or the customer you want to go create, places you in, right? And if you have this container, ultimately, what do you stand for? Meaning, what problem are you solving? But just as importantly, use the word villain. I love that. What are you pushing up against?
That's good.
Right? What are you actually what wall are you trying to break down? And is that significant enough of a problem for a particular customer? And, look, the reason this is important, if you look at the data, you look at companies who've been successful category creators, they end up taking about 70 to 75% of the category's economics, right? Not just the share, but the profitability in that category. So if you start a company and you're going to assume that success is inevitable, you start with that mindset, which frankly every entrepreneur should, then you have to understand this is really powerful thinking, because succeeding in category creation will allow you to effectively own the entire category. And it'll put your existing, or more likely future, competitors on a defensive posture. And you look at really successful companies that have done this in the last couple of decades. Obviously, there's Google and search. You look at Uber and the rideshare category. You can go sector by sector in your mind, and pretty instantly in technology, almost any of us can name off who the category leader is. So extraordinarily powerful to think about category creation through the lens of what's the problem I'm solving, but more importantly, who am I pushing up against? Who's the villain? It doesn't necessarily mean it's a different company.
Absolutely.
It's more often a particular unsolved but unmet problem that your customers or prospective customers will have.
No, I absolutely love it, because oftentimes, I always tell founders, when you talk about pain, hand to heart, like, is that pain real? Is that pain as acute as you'd like to think it is? Because when you go into companies, large companies, that's been my privilege having, let's say, worked at a Cisco, is you realize that what you think from the outside might be a problem is not that big a deal. And if you look at, if you're selling to enterprise in a company, if you're a small company, you're living existentially, small and mid-size. So like, hey, I have this one problem, solve it, or it's not important.
Yeah.
You go to large companies, conversely, because I'm so large and I have so many things coming at me, I have only 3 priorities. If you're not solving these 3 in sales or in revenue or in finance or in security, it's not important for me. So oftentimes the pitches come out as, and I think we need to avoid that with our startup, which is, this would make X's life better. The point is, does X conquer?
Yeah.
Is that pain acute enough? If the villain in the story here could be pain, it could be loss of revenue, lack of revenue, it could be a security issue that they had, but it has to be painful enough. And that's why I hate cliches, but you talk about vitamins and painkillers, and cliches often take the attention away from the message. But this cliche is true, which is if the pain is not acute enough and it's deemed, oh, it sounds really nice, the demo looks really good, give us 3 months, we'll get back to you. Game over.
Yeah.
If it's that good, they're going to lean in and ask you to kind of go forward, right?
Yeah, and oftentimes we see some of the best entrepreneurs. You're an example of this, where you've lived the problem, and therefore you know that there's an unmet need, and oftentimes that'll lead to the desire to start a company to solve that. And I think what's particularly interesting is if you can put language, oftentimes, to a category that's being created that may have never existed before, all of a sudden you're helping your customer actually put words to something that they may have had trouble describing, and it's not only for new startups and existing companies. It's also for existing companies. So, one of my favorite examples is Qualtrics. Now, if you rewind back many years, most would say that Qualtrics was in the business of powering researchers to do surveys and to get customer insights, right? Ryan, their CEO, realized that was quickly becoming commoditized. There's a lot of companies in that space. So here you had an established company, over $1 billion in revenue, that was trying to reinvent itself. So this concept, I think, is also very relevant for existing companies. In their case, what I love is they realized that within organizations, this idea of delivering a great customer experience was a very distributed responsibility, right? So the category was experience management. Nobody else had really defined that before. But ultimately, what they find, the pain point is, for them, 80% of consumers said they have negative experiences with companies. Only 20% of companies actually acknowledge that customers had a negative experience. So you have this massive gap in actual customer interaction reality and what companies thought that they were doing. Experience management was born.
Fantastic.
And what was interesting about that, it put all of their competitors in a defensive posture because they all had to raise their hand and say, oh, well, actually, no, we do that too. And they reframed the problem that they were solving, but it was a real pain point. And in essence, they went on to effectively leverage their existing business to grow into this new space.
No, I completely agree. I mean, CloudSherry was in the customer experience management space, so I might know a thing or two about No, personal examples are the best, and I love what you said, because to be honest, there was a time also when Qualtrics spoke about bringing X and O data together. There was nothing new about it. It's about operational and experiential data. But positioning yourself, using your scale to move away from, hey, I run surveys for thousands of universities and tens of thousands of students, to when you bring operational and experiential data together, you can create magical insights, right?
Yeah.
And I've lived in that space.
And they created a language for this to help their customers 100%. Actually understand and connect to this. And you and I talked about, there's a great book, Play Bigger, around category design.
It might be somewhere in that shelf. So
yeah, any entrepreneur, this should be required reading as you build and try to think about positioning, differentiation, category creation. Some of these fundamentals, I think we go back to where you started, which is this hasn't changed. Agnostic of what vertical industry and technology space you're in, thinking about who are we, what do we stand for, what problem are we solving, what category are we creating. These are foundational things that any entrepreneur should be thinking through.
And I think you can't be in Silicon Valley and close out on category creation if you don't call out Nick and Gainsight. Like, if you ask any tech exec, what name comes to mind when you talk, say, X word and say customer success, you think of Gainsight, right? That's true category ownership, where you are almost the brand associated with that category. So
yeah, it is a funny story. So Gainsight's a great example, and Nick Mehta, the CEO. So I remember I brought Nick in when I was at Atlassian to talk to some of our teams, and I remember this sort of story that he shared around the earliest days of Gainsight, and he said, previously the company was struggling with sort of its product market fit and positioning. Who's the buyer? Who's the customer for what we're doing? And he realized, and you kind of look within their customer base, there's these individuals who are really focused on helping to ensure that retention, for whatever company that they're in, the customers don't leave. Like, loyalty is a big part of this. But there was no title for this role. Every company called it something a little bit different. And they started using this phrase customer success. Now you have to go back many years. It was not really an official title for anybody. And he realized not only was there no formal title for this function, people working in the function, there was no conference. There was no place that these folks could go to learn from each other. And so he held, this is right here, I think it was Oakland, California. Yep. He held the first sort of customer success conference and brought sort of the motley crew of people in this industry together. Mm-hmm. Had no clue who would show up or how many people would come. But he gave them an identity and in essence started to create a community. And so people were finding their people. And it really was the nucleus, sort of the earliest stages of really spawning this idea of customer success as its own category. So Nick's joke is, if you want to start a company and you don't know what to go start, just go look across the industry and just find out what job titles don't have a conference.
That is fantastic.
There's probably a company waiting to be born there. But it's just this idea that you have to connect this concept of giving language to the space that you're building a company within or an organization within, give it an identity, and then build around that and help your customers help you ultimately.
Fantastic. I think the thought I want to leave everyone with is every software has a buyer, right? I mean, that's the obvious truth. But the less obvious truth is the example he gave, like which buyers don't have a great conference, aren't celebrated enough, because every role and title swears by a certain piece of software. That is the software that helps them show their work they've done, quantify success, demonstrate ongoing progress. And any category you're building, if you don't have one role in the company, significant enough, right? You need to have a significant buyer who swears by a software. If you get that, it's a path to category ownership, insane scale. If you don't get it, it's hard to see you create a significant company because you cannot have this one. It can also be used by X. I'm going after the VP of sales, but if the VP of sales has top 3 softwares already, and you're like software number 6, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Fantastic.
Well, it goes back to the fundamentals, right? So product marketing, one of the foundational elements of great product marketing is really beyond value proposition, differentiation, your messaging. Who's my persona? And you have different types of personas. The buyer persona, you've got perhaps the decision maker who's going to help influence the decision or make the decision, the end user, the admin. B2B buying cycles can be particularly complex, much more complex than a consumer decision cycle. Understanding these personas, and then to your point, who's my champion, right? Who's the person who will be significantly more impactful and productive, who I can go help succeed if they use my product. And if that is 3, 4, 5 people, something's wrong. Your proposition is not sharp enough, or you're going to have a much tougher time because it's a much more complex go-to-market strategy. So I love your suggestion that really understand the one person, the one title, function, role that's going to be successful if they use my product.
Fantastic. Who am I going to get promoted today? Maybe that's the summary of this whole discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. So let's go to go-to-market execution. You've been a go-to-market practitioner, and you've done it for your own startup. You've done it at scale. You've mentored other go-to-market leaders. And I'd really love to get into, and I'll put my founder hat on, right?
Sure.
What happens as a founder is you're hit with so much advice. Advice is plenty. And then you're told, and when you get advice, the more structured and more methodical the advice sounds, the better it seems, right? Because if I throw 5 ideas at you, it seems whatever. But if I give you a template or a framework or a formula or a pentagon or some geometric shape, it seems more scientific. The reason I'm making this case is founders are often hit with advice around how your sales funnel should look like, SDR, transition, checklist, handover, and get your pre-product market fit. And you're doing something very interesting. You're doing something very startup-ish at extreme scale. So let's talk about specialization versus generalization, cross-functional teams in the quest for product market fit.
Well, the category of conversation here is go-to-market, right?
Absolutely.
And this is something I spend a lot of time thinking about. I've been fortunate to be within some fantastic organizations where we've had unique go-to-market models. And oftentimes, the founder, the CEO, or the co-founders, they are the go-to-market team for any company. Fantastic. They should be the ones in front of customers. as a company scales, right, as you get to some, let's call it single-digit millions of dollars of revenue, you start to build out your team, you begin to attract folks into the company. I think two things are important. One is, what do I need to do to get to my next revenue milestone or company milestone with customers in the short to medium term? Answer to that is usually hustle, right? You have to figure out whatever it takes, whoever it requires, to make those customers successful, to get them to scale, to get them to stay with you, to get them to grow your revenue. That's fine. Do what it takes. However, you also have to think about the next phase of the business, which is, once I scale, what's my sort of foundational blueprint of what's going to drive revenue? Is it product-led growth? Is it sales-driven? Most companies are too early to start thinking about their channel motions. What I would say is it's really important to think about the go-to-market blueprint, not just for where you are, but at your company at 2 to 3x the size. And you have to always be thinking about that, because what I see inevitably happens way too often is you start to get a little bit of velocity, and let's say it's human-powered sales, and you double down on that. You're going to start relying on that as your primary motion. Once a company gets to, call it, maybe the 10 million mark, now the 25 million mark, the $50 million mark, it's very hard to reverse some of those go-to-market decisions that we've made. And so introducing the agility and flexibility to adapt your go-to-market model, how do you generate revenue, I think for any early stage company is really critical. And what I like to say is there should be just as much time and effort put into defining the go-to-market plan, the org structure, the levers that you're going to have. Just as much time should be put into that as you put into your product or technology strategy. And ultimately, you view it as a roadmap. It's not a static entity. How you structure and organize yourselves, your sellers, your marketing team, your sales development team, all of the kind of capabilities, including the product-led growth capabilities, that blueprint should continue to evolve and change.
What I love about what you're saying is, you think of product development, you invest in software early in advance. This is my sprint, my t-shirt sizing, this is what I'm building, blah, blah, blah. And when it comes to go-to-market, it's like, okay, let's make a bunch of calls and see what sticks. So the lack of science in go-to-market, someone said this to me long ago, which is, to be a doctor, you study X number of years, engineer, same for most professions. And then turns out when you come for sales, you do a 1 week sort of course, this is your product, this is your 1 hour product training, and off to the races, And I love what you said. And I'd love to double down on that and say that early in the startup, you really want, the quest for PMF is a combined quest. Your product manager needs to know what PMF looks like, why the buyer buys what they buy, the engineer needs to know. Because otherwise what happens, you're the pricing guy, you think of pricing, and then what does he or she do? Look at competitors and say, okay, we need to be somewhere, some theoretical one. The fun of building the product is saying, okay, where do I need to be? These are the features I'm building. You need to realize where you stand, what premium you can command, what your brand is, what are people optimizing for. All of them need to be in lockstep. And then you need to find a channel and a way to price, position, and message that product. Then someone consumes, and we'll come to this point around value, realizes value. And now suddenly, when that cycle starts to get more and more frictionless, you have some sort of product, right? Yeah. And then you put fuel to the fire. There's so much science in it. If you got 5 customers, what did you do right that you should triple down on? If you didn't, what should you stop doing that is taking a lot of resource? You wouldn't know if it's a random set of 5 people hitting up someone on LinkedIn, someone calling somebody, and you don't have reference base to measure against. So I think 2 thoughts I'm taking away. One is having cross-functional teams understand. Second, treat it as a science. And have a roadmap, which I like the product roadmap, go-to-market roadmap.
Yeah. Software engineering is a craft, right? Product management is a craft. Design is a craft. Go-to-market is a craft.
It is.
It often doesn't get thought about that way. But some of the best go-to-market teams I've had the privilege of leading, we operate them like great software teams.
Fantastic.
Right? You run sprints. You have a roadmap. You're constantly thinking about responding and reprioritizing based on the changing sort of environment. That discipline of daily stand-ups, right? How you actually flight experiments. All of those principles apply to great go-to-market.
Fantastic. I don't know if you've realized, I think 20, 25 minutes in, and we haven't yet spoken about AI. I mean, we started with AI as a problem statement, but the point I really want to drive home is before you figure out all the shinier elements that everyone's talking about, the point I really want to show up from the conversation with Robert thus far is the foundations of what it takes to build a company haven't changed. And you're actually in a much more competitive age. The internet allows somebody in Mongolia to sell in the United States. Nothing's preventing anybody. Complete globalization, access to the internet, access to AI, which means these foundational principles are what will actually define you, of course, on top of innovation. But let's come to AI because we are in Silicon Valley. It is sacrilege to have a fireside chat and not talk about AI. So I actually want to go to something Manu, I think when he spoke with Surajit the last time this forum happened, said something very interesting, which I loved, which was, can you do a unicorn with 3 people? And here's the interesting part. I think the great barrier breaking AI has done is, if I'm an artist, I always thought, man, I can't build something on technology because, how do I code? If you're a developer, you're like, oh, I'm the developer. They are the smart people who say cool stuff in English, right? So I can't do go-to-market, or I can't message, or I can't position. That boundary is broken. Like, it's never going back. You can be a songster and essentially get a writerable app. You can be a developer and say, you know what, let me find the best medium to express what my product does. So in that age, with all of this infinite possibility, where would you start? Like, what do you think AI truly does for creation and building?
Look, I think it's a sort of a renaissance era for knowledge work, right? I was in conversation with someone else recently who sort of studies this space a lot, and his position was about 50% of the job titles that exist today won't exist in the future.
Wow.
They'll look different, which basically means you're going to have a universe of roles and opportunities that are going to be created as a result of, I believe, largely AI playing a sort of force for breaking these boundaries around how you define knowledge work today.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea that a creative can be a developer, a software engineer can sort of move into the creative realm, and you start to blur the lines and boundaries of what I earlier called sort of these unique crafts. That's exciting because out of that sort of new era of knowledge work comes opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if we look just very practically at Docusign, and I look at our go-to-market teams, our basic estimate is about 20 to 40% capacity can be freed up with the coexistence of Gen AI go-to-market capabilities with sort of human intelligence when you combine those two things, which is fantastic. So what do you do? If I said, hey, you got 40% more time, or in our startup, we're going to, 40% more capacity than had we just started this company 5 years ago. That's powerful because now you can begin to do things that are truly going to create a lot of value for our organization, such as actually spend time with customers, right? Orient our time towards higher value creation opportunities, whether it's bigger deals, bigger technology bets, things like that. And so across any organization, certainly if you're a startup, the acceleration that AI presents is remarkable. But even in larger, more traditional companies, I can't imagine why AI shouldn't play some significant role in nearly every type of knowledge work across every organization.
I love it. I think the thing I think we're really resonant on, Robert, and maybe we should disagree on something just to make sure we don't jinx this, is truly this. We often, human beings, see things in binary, right? Which is, this is the only election that matters, or this is the only thing that matters, this is the only thing that's important, or AI is going to make all of us redundant. The reality is life plays out in so many shades that almost nothing is ever binary. So if you look at AI, the point is not whether it will make us obsolete. It is what will it free us up to do. The 40% more time, allowing a developer to do what he or she could not do previously, and allowing a creative person to similarly. So which means if you were unconstrained by resource, the 3% unicorn or us getting 40% more time, if you didn't have to hire a specialist for every single thing, you had that much more time to spend on foundational quests like sitting with customers and understanding. And you were unencumbered by resource. What could you create that you couldn't yesterday? The equivalent is, when compute machines came in, they're like, what about all these data entry jobs? What about all these people who punch? Everyone just went to hire out the work. I think humanity, this is the greatest springboard humanity has ever got. And it is for us to just do more things. We are today constrained by what we think our gross economic output is. But I think that unconstraint has happened. So
yeah. Let me ask you a question. Do you think the promise is powered a little bit too much by hype, or do you fundamentally think that the capabilities being offered by AI meet kind of the reality of the benefits it will offer in the short term?
I think that there's a saying, it's not mine, so not claiming IP. It's like we grossly overestimate what we can do in 1 year and grossly underestimate what we can do in 10.
Mm-hmm.
It's the time scale that is the problem. So when ChatGPT comes up and you suddenly say, oh my God, I can write a song, I can do this, you assume that in 1 year there'll be cyborgs walking all around and we'll be sitting at home sipping margaritas, right? So that's when it becomes too much of hype, wherein it's assumed that everything will change. For example, you say, oh, you don't need databases anymore, you don't need systems of record anymore. Sure, there's an example, but you have to understand who owns massive systems of record. Companies with 10, 20, 30, $40 billion in revenue, millions of customers. They don't change overnight, right? So it becomes hype when you assume that in 12 months, everything's going to dramatically change. But I honestly am a massive, massive, massive believer that the greatest J curve ever seen in humanity is going to happen with AI, wherein that hockey stick that all startups envision in terms of adoption, in terms of the context window size, in terms of computation abilities.
Yeah.
I mean, even people decidedly smarter than me for sure, like Elon Musk or Zuckerberg have said, this is the greatest technology evolutionary curve they have ever seen. They've never seen any technology quite scale so fast, so rapidly, so significantly. So in a realistic timeline, 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 years, I mean, I actually think we underestimate how impactful this is going to be, not overestimate. That's just my thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see.
All right. Fantastic. All right. So I know we also need to make sure that we have more time for questions, many other things that are going on, but I really want to bring back to one thing, and I want to do two things. One, talk about the ROI question, and then end with maybe takeaways. There's founders listening in, there's investors listening in. So I want to do the takeaway part. But the last thing on ROI, because when we spoke about foundational principles, ROI of software was something that never went away. I think it's more acute today. I want to start with an example and see what your thought on ROI is. So years ago, when we competed with Qualtrics, we were working with a very large global bank. And you know what you do? You go in and you say, I'll run your customer experience program, which was NPS. They believed in NPS. And he educated me on something that I think everyone should take away. So he said, look, if I take your program and I'm very, very senior in the bank, and I go and tell the sales team and this team and the retail team, here's the NPS program, this is the score, this is the benchmark, we're going to apply it to your organization. You're going to go in and say, hold on. So now this is a beating stick. If my NPS goes down, I'm bad. If my NPS goes up, I'm good. So you're essentially some sort of an auditor, and you never drive like enthusiastic participation when you are perceived as such. So he instead took that program, used our software with Cloud Cherry and said, okay, how does a move in NPS impact the outcome that you're rewarded for? Sales, customer retention, brand positioning, website visits, what have you, right? Or share of wallet with the certain customer. And they created the translation for what NPS does to your business for the KPI that you're already rewarded for. And then said, let me set up this program and give you data, insight, and analytics. Okay. NPS moves, doesn't matter. But what it moves because your primary metric of success moves, right? And then he realized that people so enthusiastically participated and they said, oh, wow, you increase sales, you improve retention, you improve share of wallet, you improve conversion in our marketing campaigns. And the NPS program shown in what he said was reflected glory, which is we don't need people to say our NPS went up. That is a boardroom conversation. But all these other metrics and all these other leaders became successful in their respective fields, in the currency that they're rewarded in, because of my NPS program, right? Yeah. So for me, that is probably the greatest example of ROI I've ever seen, because oftentimes you get stuck with, oh, let me stick to NPS. I moved your NPS from 41 to 42, it's pointless. Yeah. Because the sales rep doesn't care about NPS, sales rep cares about sales, and so on and so forth. So that was my sort of ROI example. Would love to just get your thoughts on how do startups think of ROI in this world? Yeah,
look, I think you're touching on it, which is if you're an entrepreneur, you're a founder, you're a CEO of an early stage company, what's the outcome that my customer cares about? And a great way to do this is ask them, right? Just have the conversation to understand what problems they're solving for, what outcomes they're solving for. If you're speaking to a publicly traded company, go listen to the earnings calls, look at the transcript, understand it's best articulation of the company's both execution and strategy is the earnings transcript. and understand how what you're doing supports getting them to the outcomes that they care about. Ultimately, the metrics that the chief revenue officer, the chief financial officer, and ultimately the CEO care about, maybe the CMO as well. Those who are on the front lines of driving growth. And ultimately, the purpose of any business is to create and keep a customer. What I love about your Cloud Cherry story is NPS is really oriented towards helping your customers, in that case, create and keep their customers, right? Measured in the form of the metric that they actually look at as their primary success metric. That, I think, translation layer you called it, understanding the link between the problem you're solving, how you're addressing that problem, and then what outcome you're getting. And so often I find, efficiency metrics tend to be a lot of the value proposition of a lot of companies. That's great. If you really want to speak the language of your customers, speak in terms of growth metrics. What's the customer growth, revenue growth, profitability growth that you can help your customer achieve? And I think that's quickly a shortcut to actually being able to calculate the ROI question that you asked.
Awesome. All right. Rapid quiz time, because we need to wind up. Maybe I'll start by asking you, what's the takeaway that any founder building here should take away? And the second part is, if you're investing in startup and you're looking at, you're also flooded with the number of AI pitches that enterprises are. What should you be looking for? What are the takeaways from this for founders and for investors?
Yeah, let's go back. I think the foundational characteristics of building a great company haven't changed. First and foremost, be really clear what problem you're solving, what category you're in, and be honest with yourself if you're shaping and defining that category or you're a follower.
Fantastic.
There's no wrong answer, but just be really honest with yourself as to what position you're in. Second, really think about your go-to-market model and how that operates today, but equally as important, what that's going to look like tomorrow and what decisions you need to make in order to design for that future. And then I think the third thing is really be sharp around the value you create for your customer. Back to the ROI question, really keep that front and center, but translate your value in terms of the outcome metrics that your desired customer, the customer that you have, care about most. And I love it when you can speak to that metric or outcome in terms of growth or revenue.
I love it.
How about for you?
All right. So mine, since we're doing a startup again, here's why you should invest in us. And that's the pitch. I've always found that the best founders are very foundational thinkers, because no matter how well you do, it's a decade at least before you build a real company. That's what, right? Sometimes you get lucky. We exited in 5.5, 6 years, but that's honestly, like, it's not the scale you should think of. Like, if I were to do a startup again, we were to start, I would commit 10 to 15 years at least, because if that's not the timeline of your commitment, you're not committed to building a real outcome, like, honestly. Now, in the middle of that, you have to leverage all the fluff that comes your way. AI comes in, next morning you're an AI startup. All that is hustle. I'm very respectful of that. But the greatest founders are foundational, long-term thinkers. And if you're not thinking in that way, there's a problem. The best founders I've also found have a very strong sense of go-to-market very early in their lives. For example, Girish at Freshworks knew exactly what he was doing. He knew he was competing against Zendesk and the likes, and of course, then he expanded. He knew where they were different on price point, user experience, customer service, quality, what have you, and market segmentation, right? And this was early, of course. Now they're a public company, they might be doing different things. And went doggedly after that. Knew that SEO, SEM was their route to market. They didn't have, I think, to the best of my knowledge, didn't have outbound for many years after they were founded. It's inbound only, right? The amount of, it is almost scary, the amount of conviction and precision there was in that go-to-market, right? Very early. And that often leads to outsized success, I feel. And the last thing really for me is often when I meet with founders, I believe, again, going back to the foundations, the greatest founders are very, very coachable. I think it's a fine line, and I hope I communicate the idea. Great founders are delusional. So let's start with that. You're supposed to be delusional. There's good delusional, there's bad delusional, right? The good delusional ones are the ones that realize that if you don't have conviction, nobody else has more conviction about the idea than you do, which means you need to be dogged. Yet you're coachable, and you know that every now and then you need to reflect. Surround yourself with the people who know better than you on certain things. That is good delusion. Bad delusion is, I know everything, stand in line, let me tell you what to do. But you need to find the good delusional founder, because you have to be delusional to think, I'm going to pursue an idea for 15 years from scratch and build the greatest company that ever was with no view of how tomorrow looks like, right? And those are the people who create great companies. Those are the people who create great outcomes. And if you're an investor, just look for these attributes in founders.
Those are the founders who create great categories.
Absolutely. Now, thank you so much for tuning in. I want you to know this is a real conversation. We had like one dinner conversation. We just chatted about all sorts of ideas. The fire is real. The fireside is real. So we just wanted to make sure that I know we were doing this remotely, but we wanted to sit in person and have a real conversation. Because this is a topic I think both of us care about. I know Manu really cares about. But it is our privilege to be in front of this audience. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have many questions and you build great companies. What are your closing thoughts?
Yeah, look, Inventus has a fantastic community. I think the power is in this idea that you have entrepreneurs, founders, company builders, investors all coming together. And so just lots of fun to spend some time with you, Vinod, and to contribute to the Inventus community here. So thank you for the time.
Manu, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you, Robert and Vinod, for eloquently teasing out that no matter how much the technology changes under our feet, building a great startup has some timeless learnings. So the reason we recorded this last session is because Vinod has been traveling. He's actually in Frankfurt for a conference, but he's agreed to actually join and do a Q&A, and Robert also. And Prasad Rajay, who was in the previous panel. So I'm going to have those three people come on board. So Shikin, if you can upgrade their videos. But as they sort of come on board, I want to sort of mention that it takes a village to raise a startup. A lot of you here in the audience have been helping the startups. You get involved, helping them with their decks to, helping them with the customer introductions, positioning, marketing. And I think this is what makes our community so special. And so if there's another company or two that resonated with you, I would highly encourage, and as both Vinod and Robert actually stressed on this as well, so reach out to them, reach out to Shekin or me or anybody on the team, and we'll love to make introductions. But, so I'm glad. So Vinod, Robert, and Prasad, thank you for joining. So rather than me asking more questions, because I've spent so much time with you guys over dinners and other conversations to sort of tease this out. So one of my old colleague, my classmate from Berkeley, and also professor at Berkeley, Maura O'Neill. Maybe if Shikin, if you can bring Maura on the camera, I'd love to have her ask a question. She's been itching to ask you guys. And next up, Roy Prasad will come on board as well. So, but anyways, Vinod, thank you for coming in from Frankfurt. Hi, Maura.
Happy to do it.
Hi. Manu, should I just go ahead and ask my question now? Okay, great. Well, this has been amazing. I told Manu I thought it was the best Inventus Capital annual meeting yet, that it doesn't reflect on the past. It just says you all are awesome. Robert, you spoke about the value and opportunity of being a category killer and amazing statistics. And I'm going to direct it to you, but your co-founder, Vinod, or others could chime in as well. Should every entrepreneur focus on being a category killer or risk their competitors will? Or what decision process should a founder go to actually make that decision, which you said is in your closing remarks was so important? Thanks so much.
Yeah, well, pleasure to be here with the community, and thank you, Manu, and nice to meet you, Maura. Great question. I've had the fortune to work in companies that have spent a lot of time on this topic, or either accidentally or intentionally shaped categories. But my short answer is no. I don't think that every company or entrepreneur needs to, be the category creator themselves. A lot of businesses, I think, succeed wildly by focusing on very particular niches. Others are highly differentiated within a category, right? So they're actually able to position themselves and still benefit from some of the economics of the category, don't have to spend at that same level of scale. There is a lot of capital required to shape and create a category to scale over time. Now, the economics of those who are successful really justify it. So I think what's interesting is to look at some of the characteristics of what category creators do uniquely. And I think there's attributes like being really sharp on value proposition and differentiation, focusing really heavily on customer experience and customer satisfaction. Thinking about efficient ways to grow their go-to-market model in order to gain reach. So I think there's a lot of principles of category creation that every entrepreneur should adopt. And one of the things I think often gets confused is category creator versus first mover. What's kind of fascinating is a lot of the companies we deem category creators were not actually the first movers. Somebody pointed me to a Microsoft Excel advertisement from 1990. This is decades ago, and it was actually quite funny. You can probably look it up, do a search. But they were not the creator of the spreadsheet. And there's so many examples of companies we deem as category creators today, Google and Zoom and so many others, that Facebook even, right, who are not first movers. I think the principles that these companies apply when they shape and create categories, those are really important for every entrepreneur.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Maura. And does anybody else, Prasad or Vinod, do you want to add anything else to it, or Robert sort of took care of that?
I'll add one more thing, which is I think category creation most often happens when there's a massive technology disruption, when there's a technology disruption that enables that category to come about. So Uber could not have come about if the cell phone wasn't around in everybody's hands, right? Google could not have come around if everybody wasn't in front of a browser looking for stuff on the then called internet and they couldn't find it because Yahoo ran out of directory entries to make, things like that. So I think there's that additional thing. You have to be, along with everything else Robert said, I completely agree 100% that you need all of those things. You need some amount of timing and some help from a rising tsunami of some type. And frankly, this is where we find ourselves today. So this is the time for category creation like never before.
The only nuance I'll add, is, look, category creation, killing one thing, but the point is, are you defining the category? Which means whatever is the sort of at the vanguard of that category, which is the latest innovation, pricing model, optimization, or even owning the brand around the category. Like, Robert pointed out how the Pulse conference evolved, right? So is that the place people in that space congregate? Is that where they have their best conversation? So if you're, for example, going into an existing category, don't get caught up by that you have to decimate the category and do something nobody's ever done. But if you're the one who defines what's the latest, greatest, and the best in the category, the greatest brand association with the category, that is category reinvention too, right? So it's not a binary around either you're defining a category or not. You could be the leading company in a category that is leading the way in multiple fronts. That could also be one way to look at that.
Yeah. Now, I would add one more thing. I think, yes, it definitely helps if there's a technology shift that can help you sort of, take advantage, and the incumbents are so worried about maintaining their business models, right? So they can help. But on the other hand, I think I love what Vinod and Robert actually dived into in their presentation as well. It's the insane focus on customers, right? So I'll give you an example. When I was building Gmail, there was no technology shift. The browser was available to everybody. Yahoo and Hotmail were the leaders, right? And the focus was on what do users want? Do they want a 10 megabit stuff that you have to delete your emails all the time? Or, so I think building a product that you would build for yourself as well, and sort of saying, hey, this would actually have a high, satisfaction rate with your customers, and sort of building it with those first principles really actually helps, right? And money came in spades, but it wasn't the focus initially. So I think, reframing how somebody else has framed the market actually helps you win. You can't sort of copy what everybody else has done and expect to win. So you really have to sort of do a judo on the established sort of way of doing stuff. But anyways, this is very good, Maura. Hopefully, the panelists here actually addressed that question. Thank you, Maura. I'll see you soon. So let's bring, we have a pretty long question from Roy and a multi-part question. So Roy never disappoints with these questions. So why don't we bring him on board? And everything from Elon Musk to government to AI taking over. So I think this is quite a big piece, but why don't I have Roy actually ask the question? Shikin, can you bring him on board?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Shikin. Thank you, Roy. Thank
Hi, Roy.
Hi, I think I'm online. Okay, there's a little bit of a preamble, so you understand that there is a method to the madness. The question is something philosophical that I've been debating for a long time, and that is the philosophical basis for this is at what point in time does the creation outgrow the creator and take a life of its own and starts making its own decisions? The genesis of this goes back to the days when I used to watch Star Trek, The Next Generation, Voyager, and all these movies, where you had this, you talk about customer satisfaction. That's something that Robert and Vinod spoke about extensively, right? So one interpretation of that could be like an Android salesman of weapons that decided that customer satisfaction required that all these carbon-infested, carbon-based beings that infested the planet needed to be eliminated so that make transactions a lot easier, right? And so the Star Trek used to have all these characters like Data and Lara, which were created by Dr. Nunyan Sung, if I remember right. And so his own DNA were part of this. And the reason this is relevant is today, we've got Elon Musk and Vivek getting ready to chop like $2 trillion of government spending and 40 billion percent of governmental budget, right? And so a lot of that they hope to replace with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So let's assume, just going to play that out hypothetically. Let's say an engine is built with a notion like all accountants are parasites and evils, and they must be gotten rid of. And is there a way to build AI in a way that through machine learning, it learns that, hey, I'm an AI engine. I was programmed with the notion that all accountants are evil and bad, must be eliminated. But I have now outgrown my creator. And now I'm able to think for myself and say, maybe some accountants are necessary. So that is a point I'd like you guys to make some comments on. I'm curious to see what you think, which is there a way, two parts, to build AI ML such that it has the capacity to outgrow the creator and his own creator's own biases? And is there a way to manage that in some systematic way so it doesn't run out of control?
Let me take a stab at it. The speculative scenario of AI outgrowing its creator is more towards the negative than the positive, which is it's programmed to respect all accountants and it chooses to do otherwise. So first, I think honestly, everyone here might have a different view on this, because I don't think we've ever had a technology stack evolve at a rate that AI is, which means even the finest brains on the planet vastly disagree on when AGI will be a reality. You recently saw Anthropic Claude. The model is able to control the computer, and then suddenly that's a step function change in what its capabilities are. So I honestly feel any AI, any creation bias is a sort of part of the system, which means three different models built by three different sets of creators will give slightly different responses simply because what prompts, what biases, what genetic code it has is different. I honestly feel I'm in the school of thought that at scale, AI needs a lot of guardrails, simply because we as technology creators have never seen something evolving at a rate and pace that it's doing. For AI to start to determine, it's easier to control the input bias, which is, hey, don't do this, don't do that, have guardrails. It's much harder to give it the ability to decide what's right and what's wrong, and then hope it does it for the best. So I would be very guarded on how open-ended we leave it. I think very purpose-built, highly controlled, tightly defined purpose AI is what I hope we continue to develop, because once you hit AGI and beyond, I honestly don't know. I don't think I have the intellect to predict where AI will take us. So I'm more focused on controlled experiments with AI as opposed to allowing it to learn and develop on its own, to be honest.
So Roy, let me take a crack. Let me take a crack at this. So, as from a technical standpoint, the answer to your question is, well, all AI learning is based on the corpus you give it from a training standpoint, and you can certainly give it new corpus from a fine-tuning standpoint to change. For example, accountants are good versus accountants are bad. For a given foundation model, you can always do it. And so the question really becomes twofold. One, in whose hands are foundation models? Are we talking about, at the end of the day, reasonable, commercially driven, but ultimately rational players like companies that have them today versus nation states that would have access to the technology for means that you can't ascribe standard capitalist commercial intentions to, right? So that's sort of who owns it. And the second is, from a technology standpoint, who today the corpuses have all been fed by humans, but really we're not far. Literally tomorrow morning, you could easily have the case that there's a closed loop from an agentic system where AIs essentially are building new versions of themselves with new training data sets that are entirely not in a given human's control. And so, but there's going to I think the bigger problem I see, rather than runaway AI, is the runaway intentions of humans, in particular nation states.
I hosted a panel yesterday on trust in AI, and there were four panelists. One of them was from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Another was from NVIDIA. And the question I had asked them was, we're looking back 25 years from now. So envision it's the year 2050. What will we have achieved through AI that we could have never predicted 25 years prior? And just to sort of answer that now, right? So it's sort of this very open question. And I won't say which of the two organizations between, the Linux Foundation and the NVIDIA who gave me this answer. But the answer was, hey, we believe that, in 2 to 3 decades from now, it is completely plausible that consciousness would emerge and a sense of self-awareness that AI would have independent decision-making capabilities beyond their programming, sort of similar to how humans experience thoughts, feelings, and will, with one big factor missing, which is empathy. And so I'm not an engineer. I don't have familiarity with programming models. I'm simply, communicating and sharing two pretty sharp folks who felt like in 2 to 3 decades, it's not outside of the realm of possibility that there could be systems that begin to reflect characteristics of expression beyond the training data and their original programming. So I thought it was fascinating, and it just led me to believe that we are entering a world where I think exactly as Vinod mentioned, guardrails and safety mechanisms and trust are probably more important than any of us realize.
So I think the question, the follow-up, and hope, maybe we don't have enough time on this panel today, but is like, where do you invest? Like as investors in Roy and our LPs and us, like, where are the startups and how do you sort of, if you're 25 years or even 10 years looking forward, Robert, you look back and sort of say, here's companies and startups that are going to be the category defining things in this new world. So I think, and this is the reason we love our LPs and our investors and our community sort of getting so involved with what we do, is because it's impossible for just me, Raju, BV, Kanwal, John to really sort of imagine all the different possibilities, but having a group that can actually help define us as well, is helpful. So, and this is why I think this question in this panel, even though it might be esoteric, Roy, but I think these questions are being asked over and over again. But thank you for that. Hopefully that was satisfying. If not, I'll share these 3 emails and you can bug them afterwards.
I love the Star Trek reference, by the way.
Yeah.
Just as a quick comment there, the original first Android designed by Dr. Nunyan Singh was actually Laura, which had too much empathy, too much emotion, and it actually became too greedy and ambitious. So the second model was Data, in which he detuned it. and took out that empathy and the emotional part of it. And it was a fascinating thing. The data is constantly learning to add empathy and the humanness to its thinking. And anyway, that's
Roy,
So by the way,
I will say the most unscientific thing on a tech panel and risk the reputation to my damage, but I'll say it nonetheless. I think Hollywood has been most prescient in terms of predicting the future, more than any white paper, any technology paper I've ever read. Almost everything you've seen in outlandish Hollywood films, correct me if I'm wrong, every bit of technology you've seen in Hollywood 2 decades ago, somehow miraculously almost in the same form factor and cadence seems to manifest itself. So I'd be very worried with what happened with that Android, because I think it's a very likely course of how that technology might evolve.
So Vinod, they're going to see you in an Iron Man suit pretty soon, huh?
I'm ready. Age is getting on me. So Prasad, if you want to crowdfund that Iron Suit development for me, I'm in, willing victim.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we may have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I'd like to bring Sarah Zaire on. She also worked at Google, but in different time frames with me. But I'll have her bring on board. So give me 1 second. And I hope, Sarah, you have your question ready to go. Okay, so while Sarah will figure out the technical things, why don't we have Steve Eskenazi come on board? Steve has the next question.
Anyway, my question is that, in general, dynamic tension is one of the most constructive things for companies. We know that when you have the right amount of tension around the table, great things can happen. Right now in the AI world, you have this dynamic tension around regulation versus letting things sort of evolve in their own time frame. Interested where the panel sits. If you had to take one side or the other, regulation versus free market, would be interested to hear the panel's thoughts there.
I can start. This is unfortunately not an A/B test you can run till the end and find out which would have been an ideal course of action, right? Especially the unregulated parts of it. I honestly feel AI innovation should not be tethered, because as a species, we are an optimistic species, which means it should be untethered. But I think, like all good regulation, you apply regulation to make sure that the edge cases which are damaging, potentially destructive, are controlled. If bad regulation is anyone writing a model, come and submit the model for approval, right? Which means it's a prohibitive law. A good restriction is any model above a certain size or does this or these use cases, right? This kind of data sets, inputs, some control over that is probably good. But I'll tell you one thing, once you have an open source model, it is published, who takes it and does what, it's very, very, very hard to control. So the one moot question might be, how much can you actually regulate AI to begin with? Simply because an open source model by itself is a bunch of clay that can be molded any way you want. So that's a fair question to ask. I don't know how Prasad and Robert feel about it.
And even the simple regulation we had from Scott Wiener got voted down, right? Ultimately, which was really very gentle training wheels. It wasn't even, it didn't have a lot of teeth to it.
Yeah,
I think you have to settle.
Yeah, I would say I agree with you. I think the cat's out of the bag already. Essentially, the train has left the station. If you're a country X, like I said to my earlier point, if you're country X, you're going to go procure, spending $100 million or $1 billion or even tens of billions of dollars on training your own models is a thing you will do. Maybe you can say, well, NVIDIA shouldn't sell its GPUs to countries X, Y, and Z, and they'll slow it down. But at most, they'll slow it down. They'll go off and build their own chips. At the end of the day, it's made to multiply access to it's lots of CPU accessing lots of memory. That type of technology. Ultimately, we cannot shut it down. We can slow it down. So I think regulation from an international standpoint is futile and sort of not going to get us anywhere. I think from a what do you do with it? Okay, so you have this super powerful model. You still have to give access. The model has to still have access to the systems around you. So I think it'll be ingress control, access control, so to speak, security in a whole new light. Security companies will be born or reborn, I predict, based on how they restructure their posture to saying, okay, how do we make sure AI doesn't come in and control and get access to what we do? The bounds and frameworks around energy systems, nuclear installations, weapons installations, weather prediction systems, transportation systems, things of that nature to get protected in a different way from what will surely be a bad threat environment out there. So it's more what you let it do sort of thing that you have to watch out for, not what it can do.
Yeah. Yeah, this was a big topic of debate in the panel that I was hosting yesterday, and sort of such a central question. There's new standards being developed, maybe not regulatory, but sort of frameworks by the FTC, NIST, other government agencies who are responding, I think, to public demand for standards that perhaps don't exist today. Steve, you used the word, I think it was dynamic tension, if I remember, or something to that extent.
Yes.
I almost wonder if you could apply that to regulatory frameworks, which is dynamic regulation. By dynamic meaning enough safety guardrails or standards with the flexibility for innovation, given the speed at which technology is shifting. I have to imagine, just as the speed of adoption and model evolution for AI, I don't think I've ever seen regulation be able to shift and change that fast, but that's sort of the era we're in now, right? And so my concern is probably more around government agility and ability to sort of move at that speed, as opposed to the question of whether it should be free market or regulation at all. I think that's going to be the challenge. Is all you have to do is listen to any congressional hearing and sitting in Silicon Valley and just wonder what planet some of our regulators may be living on, and shocking how disconnected they are from very fundamental, not even modern, but fundamental principles of technology just from the last decade. So that's probably my biggest concern, is the speed and competency by which agencies can sort of move. And look, if you go back to the earliest days of the internet, I think we all know that too much regulation too early would have massively stifled innovation, but too little has led to a lot of problems that I think we're dealing with today. So the beauty is that there's actually no right answer to this question, probably why you asked it. But I think it is such a fascinating time to just be in technology, to watch and understand how the world is responding. And my answer is just within the framework of the United States, right? To the comment around international, man, that is a whole other level of complexity. So
let me leave you maybe with, sorry, Prasad, did I speak over you? Sorry, let me just leave you with the UB40 song, the lyrics. It goes, when you don't know enough about technology, you use philosophy. So UB40, there's a song which goes, the more I learn, the less I know about before. So AI is a bit like that. And I promised this to a customer, and I'll say this is probably the way I'm looking at AI, which is none of us can claim to be the masters of it, but we can do our best to be its best students, because the pace at which it is evolving is so unprecedented that at best you follow and learn and hope to be the best student of what is probably the fastest growing technology in the history of humanity. So that's how I feel about it.
All right. Well, see, all these gentlemen are right here in the Bay Area, so maybe we should do a dinner and dive deeper into the UB40 song. But in the meantime, I know we're at the hour, so witching hour, and I want to respect everybody else's time. Just if you have just time for one short question from Sarah, she's been raising her hand, and then I'd like to bring John in to sort of do closing remarks and close it up. But I know we're at that hour, but Sarah, do you want to jump on and ask your question? Hopefully the technical stuff this time. Okay,
Hey,
there you
thank
are.
you so much for fascinating conversation and everything. I have been observing the trends in generative AI and how it works, and my hypothesis is the biggest market would be generated in the next decade or so, not by companies that necessarily create the Gen AI technology itself, but rather by companies that use it as a tool to generate whatever they want to. And the analogy is cloud computing. If you think about the market cap of cloud computing as a technology itself is not even $100 billion, but the amount of value they created over the last decade and a half is like trillions of dollars, right? And then aligned with that, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, but also I see one of the most important and usually not appreciated as much, probably my perspective, markets that is developing is not actually what companies built, but rather how they built it. And it comes back to the gentleman mentioned also 3 founder unicorns that I have been also talking about is, few people come together and can build very valuable company, but the point is they do it because they automate. So the entire operation of startups will change. And to that, like other point about jobs will disappear and new job description will emerge because, a lot of them can unify. So I was just wondering, what do you see in trends in the startups you deal with? How are they building? How's that changing? And what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, look, I work in an applications and solutions company, and right, you take the classic simple view. You've got your infrastructure layer, your models, and your solutions and apps. I actually agree with Sarah. I think there is a massive amount of untapped value creation potential in harnessing the infrastructure and the models to solve some of the most pressing problems in business and humanity. And I believe, I love the cloud computing metaphor. I believe that's where the lion's share of economics and value will be created. And it's not because, and by the way, the size of this entire pie, as we already know, is massive and it'll only get bigger. But I just feel there's so many applications of AI across every industry, vertical, line of business, sector, public and private, that it's almost unquantifiable at this stage around what type of efficiency and also economic value can be attributed to all of those applications, many of which and most of which have yet to even be created. So
I think with AI, there's 2 constraints. I think now we heard of the models may take up to $100 billion to train. Whether we agree with the number or not, there is a capital, there's an infrastructure, and there's a talent constraint to doing foundational AI. I honestly feel, right? There's only that kind of talent. And to your point, Sarah, you don't need to do it. The best companies are built on someone truly understanding a business need. When Robert and I spoke about this, I know Prasad feels the same way. Like, you need to know what you're solving for. AI is not what you're solving for. AI is a tool you use to solve what you're solving for. So the best companies, the best founders always have a very great sense for what the world might look like and use whatever tools they have at their disposal to create that. Great founders happened even before cloud was existing, right? So when compute was a very, very precious resource. When the cloud came, the greatest founders found a way to harness cloud to create faster, better efficient companies. The same will happen with AI. So if we do not over-index on AI and use the best AI tools available and stick to the basics of company building, I honestly feel, to your point, there'll be 100x, if not 1,000x or more value over the value created by foundational AI builders. It could be NVIDIA, it could be the ones building the models. I agree that the math might still remain the same in terms of what economics get created.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. And by the way, Vinod, Robert, Prasad, and everybody else today, thank you so much. And I know we had people logging in from all over the world, and I really appreciate them all.